Hey, good morning, good afternoon, everybody online. And if you're online, you're missing a lot because we have standing room only here in the DFAC. So you're missing out on a lot of good people and good food. So my name is Brian Weibrecht. I'm the post treasurer for SAME. And so today we have USACE delivering a talk on design build versus design bid build. Thanks. Okay.
A few reminders.
So yeah, a couple of reminders. So, and then this is our agenda for today. So some of the post officers I don't think are on the call right now. So I'll just run through these slides quickly. So let's go next slide.
Yeah, for industry engagement, we will be looking to do a virtual only. Our next meeting will be virtually only because it's the end of the fiscal year. So if you want to dial in for that, we'll be doing a discussion of ABG 75. In October, we'll be providing an update to everybody's favorite topic, the CSRA cost schedule risk assessment process, provide you an update from that, which will also be mostly a government presentation. On the 21st of November, so that's not our typical program. It'll be the third Thursday as opposed to the fourth. We'll have a presentation from government and industry on resiliency. We have David Dieterer here who will be providing further updates on our Christmas event program, which is currently scheduled for the 12th of December. And then if we follow our normal schedule, we're planning to have the USACE program brief, which obviously is a very popular event. We typically get 100 to 150 people coming to that. The current fourth Thursday in the month is the 23rd of January. That is a little bit to be confirmed depending on the government's availability. But delighted to see so many people online and so many people present today. I think we'll have a really good program. Brian, back to you.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to our sustaining members, and we have 215 currently in the post, so thank you.
We do have Chris Carloni on the line.
Yep,
Chris,
I
any
am.
update? Yep.
Well, we have 32 sustaining firms. Good morning to everyone. Yeah, we have actually 32 sustaining firms. The numbers of members is actually, as of August, is 209, not 215. But we have good news that we have added 16 new members in so far in 2024. So thank you for supporting the post and be an active members into this post. So that's the update. Sorry for the missed numbers, but
yeah, no, that's my fault, just not updating it. Thank you, Chris. Brian, back to you.
Sure.
Or maybe Chris, any?
Well, this is the list of the current active companies and sustaining companies. So thank you again for your continued support to the post and make it so successful. Over.
Okay, thank you.
And again, like I said, I'm the treasurer, so we make sure to call out the sustaining members because you guys really help support our STEM initiatives. So thank you for that. So this slide it's a bit dated, but we've been able to just last week I wrote some checks to Wiesbaden and Ramstein high schools to support their robotics teams, and so that's the joy that I get giving back to students. And then with you've either been a member of it or played all the money that we get from there, we're able to award scholarships. So be on the lookout in the future for the next announcement for our golf outing. So these are some of the initiatives that we have supported in the past and that we're continuing to do on an annual basis. So, okay. Enough said. The golf outing.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, good.
Ken, any update report on the golf STEM?
Yes. So let's see. Yeah. Good morning, everyone, from the first day of school in Cologne, grade school, And so I'm here actually recruiting new persons for STEM in the future. The Let's see, we will have some STEM activities coming up in the new year. One of them again will probably be a connection between the Ukraine STEM organization and STEM here in Germany as well. Scholarships applications will be going out probably in January, due in March. Golf outing will be usually it's sometime in May or early June, and scholarships will be provided at that time. Over.
Can you maybe just provide, because we haven't had a meeting in a while, can you just give a little bit of an update to how this year's golf outings went?
Yes, let's see. So we had, I think we had 11 groups, all representing different countries, NATO countries. So there was a video, I believe, provided. I can provide that again, actually, if need be. And let's see, our typical, we typically receive about $5,000, $6,000 each year. And we have about $2,000 in expenses. And we
Excellent.
provided 3 scholarships this year.
Yeah, we were able to turn around and just write, 3 checks for almost $5,000 to some of the local high school students.
Amazing. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you.
All right, these are just points of contact if you need to get in touch with us, but you see the board members here. So, okay, without further ado, I will turn it over to Tim. So thank you, Tim.
Thanks, Brian. Just move the camera and get some audio visual action going here. One moment. Right, so today's presentation grew out of a request from the Europe District. Justin Weatherwax asked us if we could provide a discussion on design build versus design bid build. As you know, the Europe District does quite a bit of design bid build work right now, unless it goes indirect through the German construction agencies, which then, or in Poland through PPI, where designers would then prepare a design build RFP, and then it would be turned over to those local governments to procure the construction. But for the most part, a lot of the work that the Europe District does is design build. So we thought it would be, Justin had requested that we look into some of the advantages and disadvantages of the 2 different procurement approaches that we have. And today we're very fortunate to be joined by Cheryl Fromme, who is currently the chief of the construction division at the Europe District. She has been with the Corps of Engineers for 31 years. She's been with us here in Europe for approximately 3 years, and in very short time will be returning to the Norfolk District as the chief of the engineering division. So Cheryl, welcome. Thank you for being here. We have Phil Obeda, who's an architect with SOM. He leads their technical design group and is based in London. And we also have from SOM, Gabriele Pascolini, who leads their business development across Europe. He has decades of experience working in the US and is currently based in London. And SOM they have some great examples of design build, design bid build, lessons learned from that I think will enrich our panel discussion that we have today. So to kick it off, I'm going to ask Cheryl, if she can share with us her perspective on some of the advantages and disadvantages of design bid build, and maybe some of the challenges that we face on both approaches. So Cheryl, without further ado, over to you.
All righty. Well, welcome everybody, and thank you for having me. So from my perspective as the Corps of Engineers, we are the facilitator, we'll say, between the AE community and the end users for helping put these design packages together. And then we typically are the ones that are working with the general contractors for whoever actually retains or gets the construction award. So we have visibility, insight, and a role to play in both the development of the design build RFP packages that we utilize our AE partners for, and then also with the administration of the design build construction contracts that get awarded with industry. So we get to see a little bit on the insides of maybe what we thought was going to happen and what reality occurred on some things. And so over my many years of working in the engineering construction community and with the Corps of Engineers, that's what I'm sharing here today is a little bit of my observations. And so the first thing I would say is that I actually am a fan of both. I think there's a time and a place for both design bid build as well as for design build. I don't necessarily think there's one that's better than the other. I get asked that all the time. I don't think that I would ever say that one's better than the other. It's really all situational and it's project dependent. And I think that when you get a project to end, one of the things that we, the Corps, do is work with our end users to identify what are the complexities, what's the project scope, what's the project size, what's, all of these various factors that are going into it. And I think collectively working with the end users to identify what is the best acquisition method to be able to deliver for our end users and those that actually need to get that project out and then occupy it and be able to do their mission. So some of the things that I would say is where I definitely think it's probably a little more appropriate and areas what I definitely thumbs up for are when you're dealing with a standardized design. And maybe what I'll talk about before I get to where I think it's appropriate is maybe I should talk about its challenges. And then maybe when I say where I think it's more appropriate, it'll maybe kind of make sense a little bit.
And Cheryl, you're talking about design build.
Design build,
Yes.
yes.
Okay.
So I think everybody has a good understanding of design bid build, right? So I wasn't going to spend a lot of time talking about design bid build because I think it's design build that tends to be the area that not everybody has as much experience and knowledge base on, and is the one that's always kind of like, oh, that's that unique. What does that mean and how does that work? So as we know, design bid build, that's where plans and specifications, the contract is fully vetted. We have a designer of record that if it was the Corps as a design and construction agent that we would utilize either do in-house or through an AE partner. And we would fully vet and produce plans and specifications 100%. And then those would go out for solicitation, and the construction contractor that got awarded that contract would be the general contractor, but the Corps of Engineers as well as the DOR on the back end are the ones that retain the designer of record. And so there's a lot of partnership and going back and forth as we move forward. If there's clarities that through RFIs, submittals, and other things like that, that the design bid build contractor would submit if they don't understand something in the plans or stacks, they think there's something missing, it's not making sense, RFI submittal process. And then the Corps of Engineers, we work with our end users for clarity as well as designer records to ensure that we can respond and review the submittals, RFIs, and all of those aspects. So I think that's your typical. So what I was going to spend a little more time, unless someone had a question, was to talk about design build. So design build is a little bit different, a little bit of different beast. And a design build in it's the upfront part is really important to get right. And that is defining. So first of all, the project's got to be identified for a design build project. So you can't just decide that it's going to be a design build project. It has to be identified for it to be design build. So that's kind of the upfront planning piece of it that end users and the Corps and all those folks need to work together to determine what right looks like for acquisition strategy. But once the decision's made that a project's going to go move forward with design build, some of the challenges and some of the things and limitations that design build has is that you're developing what we refer to as an RFP or a request for proposal. There is no standard that says this is exactly what that RFP looks like. There's a lot of leverage and a lot of bandwidth to be able to say, you know, is it a few pages or is it a significant amount of pages? Are you turning over something that's close to 35% design, or are you turning over 10% design, or even a 65% design? There's a lot of flexibility on that. So it really, again, goes back to that PDT and that group working together to define that RFP. I find it's very useful. For example, if you've got floor plan lock-in, like for schools, for example, I've used it for schools before, stateside. And what we did is we locked in the adjacencies, because that was what was most important to the stakeholder, the end users, the DODEA facilities, is they wanted to make sure that the adjacencies and where each of the different rooms were located in relation to each other, and the administration and the flow within the school. So the floor plan and the adjacencies were locked in. And then they have educational specification requirements that they've provided that kind of detail out what each of the individual rooms need to meet. And so that made it a lot easier, because they defined what was important to them, and then they provided the guidance of what was important to them. But then they were okay with allowing some industry, leveraging industry innovation and ideas on how to make the most efficient use of that space. And that's really what it comes down to, is the end users and how much ability do they have to allow industry and leverage industry and innovation. Because the RFP, once you define the design build RFP and that gets locked in, then when that gets awarded to the general contractor, that general contractor actually now becomes the designer of record as well. So the designer of record is not being held on the side of the house that it normally is in a design bid build. It's not, the end user does not have as much impact and ability to really change things if it was not already predefined in the RFP document. And I'll give you some examples, and I think you guys are going to get some examples of that too, right, as we go on. So that's probably the biggest challenge I see, is looking at what is a good candidate for a design build project based on the end user, based on the complexity of the project type itself, whether or not there's a standard design that already exists for it that makes it pretty simple. And the biggest thing is the end user's ability to have to allow flexibility and range in the way in which it's produced. If the end user needs to be able to maintain control of that design for the full design of it, it is not a good candidate for design build. If it needs to be very specific and they need to have ability to input and have something as simple, as we'll take it here in Germany. I'm looking at back of the room. You guys can't see it, but the back of the room windows, right? And they have window shades. So if your design build RFP says you must have window shades, then you're leaving it up to the design build contractor to determine what kind of window shades they're providing, because you did not specify specifically. You would have to actually get to the level of detail of what type of shades you want, window shading you want, and window coverage you want, if you want to have that control. But if you're willing to say, okay, that's not as important to me, as long as I have the proper window coverage and maybe I provide like some salient features, then design build could work. We had a situation once where it said we want operable, window shades that can go up and down. So the design build contractor provided them, but they provided manual ones, which, you had the chain and you had to move up and down. And the end user said, wait a minute, I didn't want manual shades. I wanted automated shades that I could hit a button. Well, that wasn't in the design build RFP to say that was the method in which they wanted the shades to go up and down. And because of that, it ended up being a modification to the contract, if that's really what the end user would like, and if it wasn't acceptable to say manual. So all that kind of goes back to say is that design build RFP, they do have a lot of advantages in the sense that it can get the contracts moving quicker. One of the things I really like about it is that once you award the design build contract, the designer of record, now that they are part of the general contractor's team, they can actually design around pieces of equipment, right? Because as the government, we cannot use proprietary. We cannot actually specify a type of equipment. But once we turn it over and the design build contractor, they could pick a piece of equipment and now they can design around that. piece of equipment. So they can also separate out their designs, submittals, so that they could do the foundation design first while they're still working the structural design, while they're still working the mechanical, electrical, and all those other designs. And they could submit the foundation design for review and acceptance. And then they can go ahead and get started on the foundation work out in the field, out in construction, while you're still designing the rest of the facility. So construction can actually start earlier in a design build situation than in a full design bid build situation. So those are some of the differences and some advantages that I see. I also think design build is very useful if you've got a challenging project and maybe it's not a standard project, it's not a standard design, maybe it's very complex, maybe it's very few have actually even been done in the world. And, we really want to leverage industry and our partnership with industry to come up with a great solution to this particular problem that the government may have. If you write the design build RFP properly and correctly, and then through the evaluation factors, you're telling industry, hey, this is our issues and our problems. This is what we have as our no kidding must-haves. These are the areas that we're flexible. You give us your proposal of what you think you could do to meet our end needs. And then that's something that during the evaluation cycle and the evaluation process, we're able to actually look at the different methodologies that are presented by the different bidders and determine if there's one that has more value than another. Again, that's based on the acquisition strategy as well. But it's a great place to leverage industry that maybe does things all day long, but maybe we as the government don't have a lot of knowledge on, or it's something that is just very innovative and hard charging that we really want to do that. No, I don't have specific slides. I apologize. Did not have specific slides because we did not have time to.
No, this is a discussion. So that's fantastic. That's a great start, Cheryl. Thank you
Somebody had that. So
for that. Yeah.
And then the only other thing I would say is, so we have center standardizations within the Corps of Engineers. So those are standard designs. And like I said, it's really important to get it right from the get-go of knowing what it does and what our design build can and cannot do. And my recommendation, my ask to all of the designer records and the AEs in this room is that the very first thing you should do during a design shred or planning shred, if you know that you're going to go design build, is you actually do a mini teaching session to all of those end users and all of those people in that room to help them understand their limitations or what is really important to specify. It's like, if this is what you're looking for, you need to detail it out in the RFP, because we do not approve the designs. We accept them. We accept them based on meeting the specifications and meeting the RFP. So we are not the approvers of the designer. That is the designer of record, but we do accept them and we do make sure that they meet the RFP. But if it's not in that scope and it's not in that RFP, then that's where it gets a little gray and fuzzy.
Good. I think that's a great place to start. I see we have a couple of questions, and I think we will actually get to the first question through our discussion. So I'll just ask, because I know we've touched on that topic in our preparation for today's panel discussion, which is how does design build projects as it's different in Europe versus the CONUS is continental United States, and how do we see a struggle in Europe because of the different standards and things like that. And I think, Gabriella, we talked about that a little bit, but thank you, Cheryl. That's a great start. Phil, Gabriella, maybe based on some of Cheryl's comments to get us started, any reactions, any insights from maybe projects or past experience?
We have prepared a couple of case studies that Phil will explain and go through.
Okay.
But as Cheryl will say, it is for us, because we are a private firm.
Yeah.
The main difference is the risk and opportunities and how we help our client decided what are the risks, how to set the risks, or how to have the best outcome and maximize their opportunity. That is for us how we approach that and how we try to talk to our client about this. There is a rich history, and Phil has a lot of experience especially in the UK. And as we were talking before, Europe is very diverse, so there are different situation. But in the UK, there is the Design Build Act that somehow steers the private development, residential offices, towards a design build framework that in American lingo is design build bridging, where the AOR, the designer of record, the UR, gets novated and becomes an employer of the general contractor. That somehow tries to combine two different aspects of the design and build environment. So just once, SOM is an American company. We have offices here in Europe, and we work both with the US government, the US Army or Air Force, and we have, and Phil will go through a couple of experience we had with international organization. One is the UN, and one is NATO. We are working on the UN campus in Geneva, and we did the NATO headquarters in Brussels a few years ago.
Yeah, thanks, Gabriele. Thanks, Cheryl, and Tim. Thanks for inviting us. I'd agree, Cheryl, that there isn't a single preference. There isn't an advantage of one versus the other. It really does come down to what the project best needs, and it really comes back down to the simple deciding factors of how does quality, cost, time want to be balanced and where the risk wants to lie. And even within a single project, that can vary. And I think, as Gabriele mentioned, there's an example we want to share, which is the United Nations, and it's a very large project. I think if we just go on to the first slide, that may be enough to start to speak to it. I mean, we know the United Nations have been around for a long while. They're perhaps maybe on the next slide. There's a broader scope. Yes, perfect. So the Palais has been around since the 1930s. There have been additions to that complex in the 50s and the 70s, and that building has had a significant period of occupation and growth, but the United Nations have changed and evolved over the many years. And so as a huge undertaking, possibly one of the largest contracts in Europe, there was a desire to revisit the entire complex and look to see how to bring that building to modern standards for code, for sustainability, for workplace, to understand well-being, to understand where it wants to position itself for the next 50 years, which had 140 or so member states all wanted to have an opinion on what that vision looked like, and to get it right first time, because this is a significant amount of spending, and therefore there's accountability to get that right and to make sure it's right for the next few decades. And we know workplace is evolving. We know that attitudes to what sustainability looks like is evolving. So the overall vision was to find a way to keep that complex in operation, look at a decanting and a remobilization of workspaces within that, but ultimately keep the ability to host all the conferences and keep the work staff on site. So to do that, there were 3 different phases. And ultimately, it was decided that to build a new office building to house a swing complex for all the staff was the most cost-effective way to keep operations on site. Then there was a significant renovation of the majority of the conference spaces, and then a large alteration to the existing conference building itself. And each of those 3 different phases ultimately preferred 3 different methods of procurement. And that really all came down to what was right for that stage. So the first, right at the bottom right-hand corner, you can see these chevron-looking buildings. That's the brand new office building, Building H, as it's referred to on the campus. And because that was a brand new facility looking to rethink the way that workspace and collaboration wanted to exist, and this was top-down from the United Nations, they wanted to break away from siloed cellular office workspaces and think about a more collaborative workspace. We, as SOM, bringing in our architecture, engineering, workplace, sustainability group, spent a significant period of time working with the client group, with the United Nations, to understand what does that look like? Who are the stakeholder groups that we need to engage with? What do they want? What does success look like? How do we derive that? And to your point, Cheryl, getting that right was the most critical factor. And therefore, a traditional design build contract was the right way to get that specification exactly as the United Nations wanted it, and to make sure that was clearly understood when it went to bid, and therefore it was easy to administer that contract. When it came to the renovation, there were a lot of unknowns. This was a building that, again, had a spanning of the 30s and 50s work. Who knew how much behind the surface alterations were going to be required? We couldn't get access. These are obviously sensitive spaces. Bringing in a contractor early to have an ability to lock in their inputs, to bring in their expertise, meant that we actually looked for a two-stage design bid build. So the first stage, based on what we understood were the requirements to bring the building up to code, up to Swiss Minergie sustainability standards, but without the full understanding of exactly what level of renovation was going to be required, because we needed them to get access. But the ability to start early was key. And so therefore a two-stage design bid build, where the first lump sum and then the second lump sum was determined once they were able to get involved into the works, and far easier to understand exactly what the range of expectations were with their renovation, and a certain risk still held by the United Nations. When it came to the final phase, the conference building E, that involved the demolition of a large administration building above the conference building with a huge amount of unknown, a lot more risk. And at that point, a design build contract where the contractor was going to take more of the risk in understanding how to deliver on time, on budgets, that was felt to be the best procurement method and route for the final phase. So really, it really does come down to a condition by condition, site by site preference. And this was a great example to show that there isn't a one solution fits all.
Right.
But it allowed the United Nations to get the product they wanted and to get it in the time frame and the cost that they wanted it. So
Fascinating. If I can pause you there, one of the things we did talk about in our pre-discussion as well is design build appropriate, more appropriate or less appropriate for renovation or not? Cheryl, any thoughts on that?
I can only speak for personal experience.
Yeah.
I won't speak on behalf of the Corps for this one. It really depends on the RFP, because if you're not defining, if you have unknowns that you're not able to put in the RFP, then that becomes a modification. So for us, it's a design build is a tool that more for when you're able to properly, as you mentioned, it's risk. Does the risk get transferred? The whole point of a design build on an end user, and I think a government person, I'll just say it, is to transfer the risk to you guys, right? We don't want to hold the hot potato. We're trying to pass that hot potato. So we don't want a hot potato that you can pass back over the fence and then it costs me more in the end. So, so can we identify it? Do we have the proper condition surveys and everything else that we can put in there? Are we able to write it up such that the design build contractor, when they accept it and bid on it, that they're 100% taking all the risks of all the renovation? If you can get that and do that, then it can be successful. But there, I will say that it's challenging at best on renovation projects. So again, comes always back to how you prepare the RFP. But like if you don't say that there's asbestos and they find asbestos, that's a modification.
Yeah.
So it's really how you write that RFP. And if you can write it tight enough to make sure that whatever they encounter, no matter what it is on the design build contractor, then it probably could be. But I do find that sometimes that's a little more of a challenge on a renovation.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, but like in the private sector, especially in the UK, they tend to have this two phase or two pot of money. So you have a design build that is a fixed sum, lump sum fixed, and you have another pot that is provisional money that are agreed in advance for specific items that have not been either designed properly or that are considered risks or contingency that can happen. So that is like how we see it in some places.
We do have contingency, but when you mentioned this two-stage design build, what I heard was like you award it to one contractor, but they almost go in and do like a little bit of study and design work first, and then you establish what reality looks like, and then you agree upon a cost for the construction.
Exactly.
That's not how we do design build. That's not design build for us.
Mm.
So design build for us, that we don't have a two-stage in that. That's called early contractor involvement is
Mhm.
what we refer to it as.
Mm.
Look around to see if I have any government folks online that keep me honest here. But that's what we refer to as like early contractor involvement where we would retain. So for us, if it's design build contractor, they have both the DOR and the construction contractor. But when we award a design build contract, we're awarding it for the cost of everything all at once. We do have contingency for those things that are unaccounted for, but it's not significant enough that if there's a tremendous amount. But the two-stage that what you're referring to, I've personally not been involved with that kind of design build.
Yeah.
So just for the record, I haven't been involved now.
And Phil, you're probably
Yes.
going to get to this, but
Go ahead.
how did those 3 procurement processes work out?
I think the success of design bid build, if you go to the next slide, maybe just as an example, was that we were able to execute a vision that really was bespoke. We felt proud of it. It had the input of all the groups from the United Nations feeding into what they believed was a Templar example of what the vision of workplace should look like. And that really required a significant period of what we call in the UK, so RIBA stage 0 and stage 1, which is effectively the fact finding and the brief making components, each of which take about 6 months.
Yeah.
So a lot of that early engagement, and that was stakeholder groups right from the highest levels through to the broadest levels within the organization, and getting that feedback to determine the right spec.
So like development of concept, right?
Even before we got to the concept
Right.
stage, this is a whole year prior to the concept
I see.
commencing.
Okay.
And this was because it needed to have that level of stakeholder group engagement and brief making. And then at that point, we knew we can commence the concept design. And really the detailed design stage was far more straightforward because we already had that much definition within the design. This being Switzerland, there were very high sustainability expectations. So again, getting that for a new build was even more critical because we couldn't fall short of meeting those standards. So having all the engineering resolved was critical. And it really is one of our high performing buildings on our portfolio. So it's a demonstration that, design bid builds, this is what it takes to deliver that. And there's a lot of great innovation nonetheless. There's still a lot of timber usage internally within the structure, which we still had inputs from the trade, but we did it as a design bid builds methodology. So this was a great example of where that holding on to that design responsibility to the very end was able to deliver that vision. And then in the end, the building was used as not just a swing building, but the purpose was to have every administration spend a period of occupation in that to also change the workspace culture and expectation of what the new United Nations workspaces were going to be throughout the rest of the development. So this to migrate away from what was a cellular independent mentality of working to one which is more collaborative. So this was an important component in that entire shift from where they were to where they want to be. So for that, we think it was a great success.
Yeah.
The second stage is still underway, but again, it proved that sometimes you do need contractors. Sometimes the earlier they come in, then the more they can provide beneficial input into the most cost-effective and time-effective way to deliver, especially when there's repetition. And with the administration buildings, we knew that defining it right in key locations would allow us to pretty much extrapolate and standardize the approach throughout. We knew there were going to be certain typical cases where there may be asbestos, there may be hazardous materials, there may be columns and beams that aren't in the places you think they're going to be. There may be window cassettes that are in worse condition than you thought. There may be far more upgrading needing. Typically, if you understood the worst conditions, you could start to define that. And as you say, Cheryl, as long as that's clearly captured, that the risk then still falls into the contractor. But having their input to determine what is the most cost-effective way of bringing that building from its current state through to the level needed to meet code compliance, having a contractor there to make sure that they can feed into it, so you can manage the time. Right. That was very much a time-critical element. Getting as time-critical as the first building was, the second phase really was about time. There were conferences being planned, there were events that were scheduled that really couldn't be missed, and therefore a contractor buying into saying, when you give me the documents, I can validate that I can do this in the time needed. I think that as a two-stage design bid build was the mechanism that allowed the program to be hit. We're still in the early stages of the third phase, which is the conference. And again, it puts all our responsibilities to the contractor this time. We did enough to define, and we knew from the first two phases what the United Nations wanted. So this is a far easier mechanism of saying, well, we already have now that template, and there's a lot more that we don't know. And at this point, this is the right place to ensure that costs don't escalate as we start to delve into the unknown. So fixing a lump sum as a design build is proving to be the right mechanism.
Yeah, I think one commonality I hear between what all of you are saying is stakeholder engagement initially. The more you can define what the stakeholder and the end user needs, and the ability to do that will drive a little bit which approach will work and won't work. My experience in pre-planning, so REBA 101, we still call that conceptual development. It's not always easy to get the stakeholder to define what they need. Cheryl, your experience with that, working with stakeholders?
I mean, sometimes if it's a new project or a new opportunity, they might know. And I think that's honestly, that's my job and your job is to help them figure it out and provide those leading questions so that they can provide it to us. So I think that's our job, why they come to us, is so that we can help them figure out what is and isn't important and help get that information from them.
Yeah.
If they don't know, they don't know, because they haven't been through it.
Right, exactly. 4 stages of knowledge, right? Phil, your experience with stakeholder?
Yeah, maybe a couple of slides, if you advance,
Sure.
I can talk to a summary. These are all just images of the finished building,
Beautiful.
which we're, again, proud of, and the United Nations are proud to have as their new emblem. But if we head to, I think this is the next slide. Yes. So we tried to identify what we thought was a stakeholder engagement process that we call mobilize, discovery, engagement, analysis, and synthesis. And along that way, there are a number of processes that then lead to an implementation of what is delivered at the end of that stage. We've worked in education sectors, health sectors, aviation, transport sectors. So in the end, any stakeholder group is a difficult one to manage because you need to get everyone aligned with what the expectation is. But there has to be a high vision goal. And the good thing that helped us with the United Nations was this idea that the workplace had to change. And not everyone will buy into that idea. Some still want to keep the way that they work unchanged because they don't want the new. But that has to come from the top. And once that vision starts to get set, then working with all the groups to understand how to deliver that becomes important. If that vision isn't set from the top down, it's a very different discussion because it's about keeping the status quo. And the status quo is the easiest thing in the world to do.
Yeah.
But it does. But the United Nations, our NATO building, these are projects that had a 10 to 15-year design construction life. So what you think is right on day one, 10 years later, it's already out of date. And you have to accept the fact that these are large undertakings. So having a vision that is going to be beyond the 10 years is tough, but that's where from the top, if you get it right, then you can get it right for the next few decades. And I think that's really important before any stakeholder discussion is set.
Yeah.
But I do think, and I'll clarify, I guess what I was trying to intend is that I like your process flow here, is that think that we as the architects and the engineers in the room, that's our jobs. We may be working with folks that, that's not their mission alignment. Their mission assignment is something totally else. They know exactly what they need for functionality of the building. And I think that's what they bring is the functionality, what they're looking for, what their mission is, what they're trying to do with it. And I think it's our job to translate that into whatever design build RFP or design bid build plans and specifications. And so that's where I said, I just feel like that's where we have to be the translators of, okay, help. Stakeholders are going to tell us what and if you have multifunctional, multi-stakeholders in a building, you're going to have a bunch of different end users because you might have a different people, but you got to learn and you got to listen and you got to figure out like, okay, this is what they're saying, their usability. This is how they're saying they need to access their equipment, their data, their offices space. This is how they engage with each other. And then what does that mean? And then, personally, I like BIM. I think it's a great visualization tool to help push back in a visual manner what you think you've heard from them of how that space and that structure can be utilized.
Mhm. And then Phil, remind me, the UN building, was it
Yes.
a new build or was it similar to the other facility renovation and new build or?
The building H, the one I showed you on the bottom corner, that's
Yes.
the entirely new build.
Right.
So there was a terrace slope landscape at the corner of the site.
Mm.
It had a great opportunity to think of a new way of trying to create terraced open spaces that change the idea that you sit in an indoor office and that is your environment until you commute for lunch and then head back in the evening. So it was able to, again, just shift the idea of what a workspace could be. So we took advantage of the landscape and we built a brand new facility building. The rest, yes, was existing and it had a degree of known and unknown conditions that we had to work around.
Yeah. And would you apply this stakeholder analysis process to all of the projects, or does it depend on if it's renovation, design build? How does this adapt to that?
I think we found this to become a template for almost all of our
Right.
processes, and
Yeah.
the period of time may vary. And
Yeah.
in this case, we needed those first sort of 6 month and 6 month periods. Some institutions are better versed in terms of what they know that they want, and they've delivered these in other locations, and so they're all prepared. And some are still trying to find their feet. When we work with NATO, they perhaps had less immediate experience. We worked with the United Nations in New York before working on the one in Geneva. So there's perhaps some lessons learned already from the previous. So it will depend on how much time it takes and how complex the intergovernmental or interdepartmental organizations work.
Yeah.
At the end, it matters also the culture of the institution you are working
Right.
with, because how process oriented or how long they have thought about their processes, how they implement change matters if this is successful or not.
Yeah. Again, just to go back to some commonalities, I think we have agreement on complexity versus standardized design, which one is more appropriate, as well as depending on the quality and schedule. One thing we haven't talked about too much is price. How effective or economical, or are there any ideas about design build versus design bid build? And I know it depends on what type of facility we are, but how about experience in how much it's impacted budget, price, overruns, delays, anything related to cost? Cheryl, or sorry, Gabriella. No, go ahead. Yeah, sorry.
I'm actually interested to see what they say.
Sorry.
We just finished in the Olympic Village in Milan.
Yeah.
And that shifted from a conventional design bid build to a design build because the client could not get into a budget in time to deliver that
Right.
to the time when the 2026. So in that particular case, the reduction was more than 25% of the cost.
Okay.
And they had a lot of leverage and changed, and they could change. They changed the structural system. But they managed to do that using more off-site construction or prefabricated construction.
Okay. Prefab. Yep.
That really shortened the time.
Accelerated.
Yes.
Yeah. The schedule.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sure.
I would say from my perspective, it really does vary.
Yeah.
It varies on the contract from contract to contract. Just like in design bid build scenarios, you have some projects that go smoothly, no issues whatsoever.
Yeah.
Same thing with design build. You have some that you have no issues with, others that you do. So it's really just dependent. And it all goes back to how well you define that RFP scope.
Right. The scope. scope definition is important. Stakeholder engagement, getting their input initially so that you can define that scope. Phil, did you have more you wanted to expand on in terms of presentation wise examples, anything that we can?
I think the next couple of slides maybe just illustrate the points you've made already,
Okay.
Cheryl, which are how we strategically organize the relationship between the client group, the contractor, the designers, and these are familiar. So in the United Nations, we had initially proposed to use a construction management approach, which we haven't talked about today, where we have a third party who effectively is taking far less of the risk and there to bring in expertise, and still the risk is held with the client group, and really the United Nations did not want to go down that. And as much as the expertise was valued, the holding of the risk was just seen to be too much of a disadvantage to the United Nations. The next slide perhaps illustrates how the new build and the renovation was organized. And so we worked alongside the clients, and then the main contractor appointed once the design reached a level of resolution, and then their trade contractors were falling under the risk and responsibility of the main contractor. And we worked alongside the clients to ensure that what they delivered was compliant with the contract briefs.
Right.
And then the last one is where we have the conference building, the last phase, where under a design builds process, a certain level of resolution was completed and then transferred over to the contractor. And at that point, having a fixed lump sum to ensure that the cost was all, the cost risk was sitting with the contractor. So in that case, with a level of unknown, that was key and critical.
Yeah. Let's talk construction management just a little bit, because obviously getting the RFP and stakeholder engagement right from the beginning so it can be procured, getting it out there. Once it goes into construction, I can speak from our experience, which is we are typically contracted to provide what's called contract construction phase support, which is a process whereby the constructor starts constructing on the design, and if they have questions, they come back, or if there's errors and omissions, we're asked to correct those. Cheryl, your thoughts on construction phase supports, good examples of it, bad examples of it. What has been your experience on the construction side in terms of the support the U.S. government gets from the AE community during construction?
Are you talking about for design bid build or design builds? What are you talking about?
Kind of both. So where, obviously, design build, you would have possibly a lot more involvement, on.
So for design bid builds, and you're talking about for the AE community, yes. The designer of record, I think they have a responsibility to stay engaged and involved to help ensure that the design, if there's any issues, like you said, if there's a design error and omission, they our partners, AE partners will get involved to help clarify. As for design bid build, obviously there's a lot of RFIs that will come into us, potentially submittal reviews also come in, and it's a decision that's made amongst the PDT about whether that's something that our construction teams, our USACE construction team is capable of answering and then responding to the general contractor on, or if we need to go back to our DOR, our designer of record partner, or even if it's something that the end user stakeholders need to respond on. So there's a variety of people, and it really is situational based on what the submittals and or their RFIs are about. In our contracts, in the Corps of Engineers contracts, we have certain time limitations for being able to get back to the general contractor in order not to slow them down, and to ensure that they can keep moving forward with their projects.
Yeah. And that's been our experience as well, as depending on who the contractor is, how they bid the project, what their availability of resources are. All of that kind of drives the post-design, pre-construction process. Phil or Gabriela, thoughts on construction management, involvement of yourselves during construction?
I mean, we we have projects all over the world, and I think we have a varying degree of design control depending on which region it is, but nonetheless, we still want any building that we've designed and had a hand in to be delivered to the level that we expect, and the client is expecting as an owner, ultimately, irrespective of where in the region that may be. And I think we have as architects, a bad habit of being stubborn. And maybe that stubbornness is wanted by the client because we know that there'll always be another way to do something. And sometimes there's a clever alternative, and we'll always be open to hearing what that clever alternative is. And that's how we learn about innovation. But deviation from what the client is expecting as an owner is something that we're there to help safeguard, because ultimately we don't want corners to be cuts. We don't want standards and quality to be undercut. And we take pride in being able to be pragmatic about it, but still to ensure that that in all the course of the journey from starting construction to completing it, all the unknowns and all the unexpected that can come along the way still don't deviate from the ultimate goal, because some of those corners, if they are cut, just will come back and it's penny wise, pound foolish, as we'd say. So we're there to ensure that the vision is maintained, and it's a process of again being pragmatic and understanding that's where there are alternatives, have open ears and learn.
And so the biggest thing is when a differing site condition is being discovered, not a normal difference, it's something that then whatever the intent of the design was might be modified. It's extremely important the designer record's involved at that point, because you want to make sure the integrity of the design does not get, as you mentioned, just doesn't get changed.
Right.
So those are areas that we would most certainly be relying on our AE partners to help us to ensure that design integrity does not get modified.
Right. Very good. I'm just wondering from our audience, any questions from, I know we have several people engaged on the call that have a lot of experience in this area. Any thoughts from our audience, either here in the room or online? Okay. Phil, any other insights from you? Anything else you want to show? We can.
I think the United Nations building is probably the best example to share. I mean, we had a similar project in a similar organizational group with NATO, where it was a new build and a very different approach, because this was an entirely brand new building and a new vision. So perhaps less nuanced and less complex than the United Nations. But I think the United Nations project shows in the contrasting approaches best. So possibly the best example. If there's time, I can happily talk about the second building, but it depends on what time we have.
We have a little bit of time, so that would be great.
Okay, so I can share some other lessons learned if we can probably skip past some of these. But this actually, maybe just going back a couple of slides, maybe starting from the beginning of the sequence. If you just go back one or two, this perhaps explains anyone working with existing facilities that has to somehow maintain operation on site and think about revisioning how workplace goes about. This perhaps illustrates that complexity. So the brand new building H at the top right-hand corner was the new complex first built, whilst the rest of the site was under occupation and operation. Next, we then had to work with the United Nations and also with the contractors to understand what is the appropriate sequence for renovating buildings and departments in order to keep prime operations still underway, make use of the building as a swing space for different departments, which departments take that first, and how that is then sequenced. Think about the construction site and how we then close and cordon off access. How do we maintain temporary fire regulation conditions in a building which is ultimately one long snake of a building? But and along the way, think about what the sequential upgrading of that means, and how that ensures the safety of workers and the safety of the construction crew on site. And then next, then where we are pretty much today is looking at the demolition of the accommodation above the main conference hall, and that is possibly the most time critical component, because there are events planned. As I'm sure anyone working with intergovernmental groups know, these things get planned long in advance. The guaranteeing of conference space for a number of host nations is possibly the most important factor, and therefore time cost quality became the most critical, and therefore getting the contractor to commit to a time, even more than commit to a cost, was perhaps the more critical to ensuring the functioning of the sites. And then the last slide, I think, is just finally closing down what the eventual building will look like, and how the overall complex will be handed over.
Excellent. And then you said,
If there's time, we can talk about the and this is maybe just a view just to show the new build nestled into the landscape, and then the historic building just to the outermost.
so I mean, and just by looking at this, it looks like a very confined space as well, right? I mean, with the space, the diagram you had earlier, it looked like it was just in the middle of nothing, but to some degree, you're right next to a city, right?
Very much so.
Yeah.
Very much so. And it's very much a public working building. It's a functioning building. There are huge groups there constantly coming, being given tours. So it still has to maintain a layer of operation, even whilst there's a construction logistical program taking place over the course of 10 years or so. So that in itself is something that bringing in a contractor to help give some guidance in terms of getting the sequence right is critical and valuable.
Yeah.
And we learn a lot in that process as well. We have our own assumptions, but there's things we can still learn even as architects. Maybe just a couple of slides on the NATO building, if it helps. So this is a different challenge, and this one was I believe in the 1960s, they had the original NATO headquarters, and then as the member groups started to grow, it reached a point where I think in the late 1990s, it was decided that a competition would get awarded to look at a brand new complex and think about what that meant as far as a vision for how NATO wanted to work. Again, these are security independent states that had to be housed within this new complex, and again wanted to have a vision of sustainability, of what the new idea of workplace would look like. So that brief setting was equally important. The difference with NATO versus the United Nations was that whilst NATO were able to work with us as architects and engineers to help define that brief, they didn't have the mechanism to deliver the project, and therefore they had to bring on board the Belgian army as a partner to help administer and deliver that as an infrastructure, as a piece of site real estate, and then hand it back over to NATO. So that was a slightly different relationship, but again, one that takes a long period of time. So getting the vision right from day one, knowing that it's 10 years later after you start to hand it over is important. And in this case, there was quite a significant design period that took place. If you maybe advance a couple of slides, you can see the scale of the building. Some may recognize this from various,
been there.
Events. So it's a recognizable building. But maybe across a couple of slides, you can start to get a gauge of the complexity it has as a presence internally, as a presence externally. It really was trying to be a symbol for an interlocking of and a cooperation of states. So it had a great importance in terms of its architectural significance and the message it wanted to convey. Design, bid, build was the obvious route for ensuring that vision was fully defined before going out to procurement. And in this case, it was the right delivery method for the sites. But just a couple of slides to. There's always lessons learned in the process, and one of those is that you can try to define as fully and completely as you want to what the building wants to be, but as you were saying, Cheryl, sometimes that's based on what you know, and then you realize by the time you've completed that process, if the design period it takes too long, then what you thought you wanted on day one doesn't quite match what you wanted by the end day, and that's always the risk of taking too long to get to a concluded design.
No, but then I think that going back to the organization, like the NATO, they created a steering committee an ad hoc steering committee to have all the engagement with the stakeholder. That is quite different from the UN, where the procedure was done by themselves rather than an ad hoc vessel, and that the success of NATO versus the least successful results of the UN, but the least successful result of NATO that took 10 years, and at the end now, because there are new members, they have to go back and enlarge the building.
Yes, a quick question for a UN facility or a NATO facility. When you're designing the communications or IT, that accordance with a UN standard, a NATO standard, or a UFC standard? Or country specific.
I'll repeat the question just so our audience can hear. The question is, when designing to communication, the communication portion, what standard is used? NATO, UFC, host nation, thoughts on that?
We came across a number of cases where there were a whole hybrid of standards. I mean, ultimately, we still are designing a building that has to meet the local codes and local requirements. Sometimes there are international standards that go above and beyond that. We found that, as an example, in the United Nations, when it came to communications for broadcasting and for acoustic control within translation booths, and a whole host of other very specific requirements that perhaps the United Nations had defined well enough within its own organization elsewhere that were varying what may be defined in the EU or in Switzerland. So it really, we had to work with the United Nations as a client to say, well, there are three standards you could apply. Which one do you think is right for your group? And that's it's a good question, because there can be times when it is over and above what might be the local expectation, and it's important to flag those up early. Otherwise, say Cheryl, you don't get the product that you wanted, and you know.
For us, so we were not involved in this particular project, but for those that we're involved with, and we do have some in Belgium, we have Netherlands, all over the place. If we're putting U.S. soldiers or U.S. civilians in that, we have a UFC. With the UFC is a guidance that we have to follow, as well as we look at host nation, and then sometimes our end users have their own requirements as well, especially when it comes to IT, telecom, those type of things. I've noticed a lot of times where the end users will say, look, we appreciate what you might think, but these are our requirements. So normally what we do is that's something that during the design shreds and during the design process you look at. And in most cases, what you're looking at is what's more stringent, right? So if you've got three different codes, you're going with what's more stringent in most cases. Sometimes they're conflicting, and that's why I say for most cases you go for what's more stringent, because then it's more stringent of the codes. But if they conflict, then that's when you really have to work through and say, okay, what's the end users need, what's going on here? And then usually for us, if it's UFC that's conflicting and we go against the UFC, we actually have a process. We have to go up to our headquarters to get a waiver. So it's not even just a matter of like the PDT can make the decision, they make the recommendation, and then we have to run it up through our chain of command to get waivers for that.
Yeah, and code compliance is an issue, not just related to communications, but everything. I mean, we do a lot of family housing, and believe it or not, spiral staircases.
Yeah.
And the size of a step, and then the width
For the
and the
foot,
dip,
yes,
and
yeah.
everything it's different depending on where you go. So, and that was an example where we had to go up to the headquarters and get a waiver because the host nation standard was so strict in code compliance. And interestingly, SAME actually did a whole event just based on code compliance. And what it boiled down to, believe it or not, was having respect for one another's opinions and listening. So you would think it would come down to like some scientific analysis that you can, put in a couple of things and it spits out an answer. But it really, it's very subjective, believe it or not, depending on who's in the building, what it's being used for, where it's located, how many people, all those types of things. So Terrific question. Yeah, very good.
You have who's in the building, but you also then have who's maintaining the building.
Yeah,
And sometimes those are different entities as well.
for sure. Yep. Great question. Right. So we are kind of getting towards the end of the hour. I think I'm going to wrap up just a little bit here. I can't believe we don't have any questions from the likes of Chris Carlone or Bison Freitag, who's here in the room. No insights as to what do you prefer, design build versus design bid build?
Well, I mean, I can say what we prefer, but I mean, for myself, I can't speak for the entire company.
Yeah.
But as a general contractor, I would say, of course, design build. Me, as by talk there, I can speak a little bit of my department,
Okay.
do like it.
Yeah.
Because we have control over the design.
Yeah.
Especially over constructability and timeline.
Right.
Of course, communication with the client is still very important at that stage. But design build has its advantages for us as a general contractor, simply so we have control over the design. Of course, we're taking more risk for that. That risk will be priced, of course, gotta be open about that, but it gives us advantages when it comes to construction. And in terms of, let's say, modifications to the contract, of course, as I said earlier, it has to be defined very well, so you can, mitigate modifications, but you also have modifications in design bid build. So I'm working on a project right now that's a design bid build, but since the design has been sort of all over the place, it wasn't done, let's say, in Frankfurt or in Germany, at least, we're still going into the design and redesigning parts of it to make it comply to local laws and regulations.
Right.
And that's a modification in and of itself.
It
which
is.
Shouldn't be. So I think even in the design bid build, having the general contractor on board as early as possible is always good, which is, with the early contractor
Involved.
necessary.
Yeah.
So,
No, and
all aboard.
thank you for that, Weiss and Freitag. Very good insights. And I specifically reached out to you because I know within the construction community, there is a tendency to want to do more design build, which I think kind of just to bring this full circle, which is what drove a lot of today's desire for the discussion, because obviously you provide your feedback back to the Europe District, and they listen and are therefore, potentially open for doing things in different ways. At the same time, from what we've heard today, there are projects that are well suited for design build, and maybe some other projects which are less well suited. And if I could just kind of run through a couple of those things, I think we agree if there is risk. Oh yeah, I'll just start with the first one, then Chris, I'll go over to you. When it comes to risk, if there is a lot of risk and that could be transferred to the contractor and they're willing to take it on, then perhaps that's a good approach for design build. Chris, over to you.
Oh, no, thank you. And first of all, thanks to the panelists for a very interesting conversation. I mean, I speak from an environmental standpoint. Yeah, that's my area of expertise, so I cannot speak for my design and planning colleagues. But yet, it really depends for at least an AE company like us, which one of the two solutions to choose for a job. It really is dependent on the conditions and the uncertainties and how to transfer the risk. After all, this really, the government wants to transfer to the contractors, and us as a firm want to transfer to somebody else's policy. So I don't think we have a preference for either or. That's my answer.
Okay, thank you, Chris. No, that's great. And then I think another commonality would be stakeholder engagement early on to how far can they define their requirements and how flexible they are if they're not met, which will drive the procurement approach as well. But certainly stakeholder management and getting the stakeholders to define their requirements is key for any project. But depending on their ability to express it, and the AE's ability to interpret and help define that will then drive also the success or non-success of a project.
I will clarify one thing.
Yes,
'cause
please.
You said flexibility if the requirements are not met, and
Yes.
I don't think that's an accurate statement.
Okay.
I think it's flexibility on how they are met.
Right.
Not whether or not they have to be met,
Yes.
period.
Okay.
Their requirements must be met.
Very good
The
point.
difference is how prescriptive do you want to be in how those requirements are met? And are
Right.
you willing to allow some innovation and for the industry on figuring out how to get to that end result?
Yeah.
And if you have that flexibility and you're willing to give a little bit of flexibility on how those end requirements are met, that's more of design build.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Cheryl. And then, so just again, full circle, and we'll wrap it up with this thought is, I know the Europe District is considering, are there different innovative ways to do it, to complete their mission, which is the successful construction of new infrastructure for the U.S. government in Europe. Design build, obviously, advantages, disadvantages, transferring risk to the contractor, also potential innovation that industry can bring on complex projects, also some advantages to that. So depending on what the stakeholder needs are and their flexibility to meeting their requirements, and the time, cost, quality requirements of the project, if they lend themselves to design build versus design build, will ultimately define which procurement method is chosen. And we'll just end it on that note. I do want to thank our panel members today. Cheryl, thank you very much for coming out as a sign of a token of our appreciation. We are handing over a SAME coin, centennial version. So thank you, Cheryl, for your participation. I know you are busy in packing and getting ready to PCS back to Norfolk. Good luck with that. Phil, also for you, a coin from the Society of American Military Engineers, Centennial, and Gabriela. Thank you both for joining us today and having such a fruitful discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks for inviting us.
And with that, we're gonna call it a wrap. Thank you, everybody, for your participation today. And this presentation